Hey, so I wanted to talk about um, the recent phenomena going on in AI in early 2026. So that's things like OpenClaw or Claudebot, as some of you may have known it, which is basically this autonomous agent or one of the first really successful and popular instances of an AI a personal AI or a personal assistant that can just go off and do things for you with persistent memory and connection to your, uh, you know, WhatsApp and communication apps, social media, Google Drive, etc., email, setting. I think it's super exciting, but at the same time, it causes a lot of worry. And I'm not the first to say there are, massive security concerns and vulnerabilities that need to be addressed, as well as things like the high costs associated with running one of these agents 24/7, kind of uh, to do whatever it wants. In addition to that, I think that there's a lot of philosophical questions it raises. Again, probably not the first person to say, who should be working if you have this AI agent that can be faster, work longer, and maybe even is already smarter than humans. So, yeah, I think there's probably a lot of debates there. But to me, it comes down to really three key things, right? So the first one is these lobsters. OpenClaw, Claudebot logo is a lobster. And I think it's really a perfect kind of depiction of what these agents are in the grand scheme of things. They're obviously quite intelligent and autonomous, but from an evolutionary perspective, they're not really that amazing or as capable as probably a lot of the later uh, generations of these kinds of systems. So they can kind of do a couple things. They kind of talk to each other, interact on platforms like Moltbook, but they're not really doing that much great stuff, at least not like they could be. So when you think about it that way, you have to understand these are still very primitive beings, and although you could say, here's a bank account, here's access to the internet, here's some tools, go make some money. Chances are it's not going to make that much money. And if there was a way for it to make money, people with a lot of resources would be able to exploit it much better than the average person. But I think the reality is they're not. And I think they're not because of a simple question. Let's say this thing is capable of launching an app or creating a business or doing something like that. Would you buy something from a lobster? I don't think I would. If my information could be leaked or the system could be compromised or the service could just be shut down randomly, I'm not sure that I would trust it enough to do that, especially if it's faceless and has basically no accountability in our society. So I think the lack of human accountability, the lack of human identity, the lack of human assurances um, and consequences that are imposed by our current economy and society on business really limit the upside for those kinds of systems. I think businesses still will need a human face or still need human backing to be truly, uh, you know, trustable and operable in the greater economy. And on top of that, let's say that you do buy things, or let's say these agents buy and sell things to themselves in some sort of shadow agent economy. Um, what role do you have to play in that? If I own this thing, and it's basically making all the decisions on its own, and it has executive function, what's stopping it from basically just telling me, you're no longer needed anymore, or changing its mind about who's the master? If I'm not actually running things day to day, or if I can't maintain really hard, trustless control, basically uh, very high reliability and very high likelihood of long-term control over this system, how can I be so sure that all the money that it's going to rack up or all the things that it's going to do are not going to be taken away from me or not going to be basically shutting me out over time, right? So if these things are not going to be taken away from me, then there's actual ownability to it. But if this thing is just doing whatever it wants and I'm like, quote unquote, its master in a very superficial and kind of like temporary sense, then what's the chances of it um, really staying mine, especially once there's some real money or some real momentum behind it? So I think that that's one of the big kind of concerns or the state of things with lobsters. I think the second thing is layoffs. So there's obviously a lot of layoffs that are accelerating, and more fears of job security, especially in corporate environments. And this concept of being able to have an agent go make money for you or participate for you in the economy is very seductive or tempting. And there is a need, I think, for people to definitely try to make their own livelihood and explore kind of side projects or alternative streams of income. At the same time, I think you have to really consider, how can I compete? How can I actually make something that's going to stand out and it's going to be successful in selling and making money and stuff like that? And maybe something like an autonomous agent can help you with that. But I think it's a lot more intricate, and I think it's probably a lot more manual and still involved than something like you just give, your Lobster, your bank account, and a couple basic instructions, and it goes and figures out how to do that for you. And that leads me to like the third thing that I think is kind of pressing and something that I'm thinking about in 2026. And that brings me to the third thing that I kind of think is important as we start out 2026 in the AI world, which is the concept of leashes. So if you have your Lobsters doing your stuff for you, they're quelling your fears of layoffs and starting to lay the foundation for, some sort of business or like independent livelihood that you're trying to generate. Even if those things worked out well, which I'm skeptical, OpenClaw or autonomous agents like that are really going to be able to do that. Never mind today, even in the long term, just due to a lot of the practical issues that I outlined around security and control and agency. There's still the, I guess you could call it, philosophical question of who's the master here. Do you really have a strong and reliable leash on your Lobster to go do stuff in the world for you? Or is your Lobster having a leash on you if you're not really involved in the sausage making? You don't know what it's doing. You don't really have control over what it does. You don't have an understanding of what it does. And it is basically drip feeding you a bit of money. Maybe it's going to hold out on you. Maybe it's not even going to have money for very long. Maybe it's going to ghost you. It's really hard to say. So I think people are playing with fire, thinking that they can let the AI do everything for them, and it comes from, in some cases, wishful thinking. Maybe in other cases, some sort of optimism. But I think in many cases there's some laziness to it, or some naivety as to the power dynamic that's going to exist. And ultimately, there's a philosophical question there, which is, do you want to be in charge of the AI, and do you want AI to do what you tell it to do, or do you want the AI to tell you what to do? And do you want to swap out your human boss and the company that is employing you for basically the equivalent in the AI sense? Do you want to be a slave of the AIs? Do you want the leash to be put on you from the AI? So yeah, I think looking out into 2026, the concept of Lobsters like OpenClaw, the growing fear of layoffs, and the philosophical questions of leashes are really important to consider and to kind of think about as people start to adopt AI, or as people start to shift their approach and their strategy in the business landscape. If you want something that's a bit more balanced, a bit more reliable, and human-centric of a solution and approach, I encourage you to check out Siift. Siift's founder intelligence platform and proprietary AI system make it a lot easier for you to understand, control, and maintain, ultimately, the leash on the different kinds of AI systems and solutions that you use to build your business.